So we know there's partisan bias in the media, even after the newspapers have broken free from the party presses. And for example, we know Fox News is generally considered biased towards Republicans, whereas MSNBC News is typically considered biased towards Democrats. But partisan bias is not the only bias that exists. There's racial bias in the news. Iyengar and Kinder, as well as Iyengar and other authors, co-authors, and just other authors altogether, have written about this. You can see this screenshot of these young white men and these young Black men, and how the news portrayed very similar stories about burglary charges pending against each group of men, and how that was portrayed differently. And if you're interested in that, I encourage you to go to the annotated slides, which not only has a description of what's going on, but also a link to an article that talks in more depth about that. There's also gender bias in the media, and we can see both racial bias and gender bias in political reporting, not just in the case of crime reporting, in how people talk about different politicians. Think about how people celebrate the way Bernie Sanders dresses. He's all disheveled, and that's great. We love that Bernie Sanders dresses like this, right? At the inauguration with those gloves and the coat and sort of just looking kind of not necessarily totally put together. People love that. That became such a popular meme, right? Remember when Obama wore a tan suit for a press conference in the summer in Washington, D.C.? People freaked out. But the thing is the freak out is not even the point. The point is the media kept reporting on it and kept debating, should he have worn a tan suit? And maybe that's not a racial bias. Maybe that's just Bernie Sanders is in a different position than Obama, and people treat them differently because of that. But there may be a touch of racism or racial bias, right? It may not be actively that the reporters are racist, that came up with how the different people were portrayed. You can see the same thing in how female candidates are portrayed. There was constant criticism of Clinton's pantsuits. What's up with them? She looks like she has cankles. But again, no one's really particularly criticizing Sanders and how he dresses. You can see that as well with coverage of Clinton when she became a grandmother. So all this speculation, would she run? Would she not want to run? Because now she's a grandmother, so apparently that'll take up all her time. Or maybe she'd want to run more because she'd want to show her granddaughter that women can do anything. When Romney, who was the Republican candidate at the time, had new grandchildren, it was reported on. But it was reported on as a very hard-hitting policy piece. His son and daughter-in-law had these babies via surrogate, which may or may not go against certain policies and religious views that Romney's espoused in the past. So how does that work? How does that fit in? Has he reevaluated his feelings on egg and embryo development, right? So no questioning of whether he would run or just, hey, what does this mean for his policies? So we can see that those biases are not necessarily because the media is sexist, but it's these sort of implicit biases that maybe we're not even conscious of in ourselves come across in the media, and therefore in how we perceive certain events and how we perceive different candidates in different ways. And there are tons more biases than just these. There's a bias for fairness. The media usually likes to present both sides of a story, but maybe there aren't two sides. Maybe there's one side, or maybe there's 10 sides, but there's this bias towards showing two sides of a story. So sometimes that can maybe misconstrue stories. There tends to be a bias towards issues that matter to upper middle class and upper class people who are highly educated, right? Most reporters have journalism degrees. So they tend to be, like the majority of people with higher education degrees, whiter and wealthier than the average population, and obviously more highly educated than the average population. A lot of you noted that Congress had that kind of demographic as well, that Congress members are more highly educated than the public, which might cause Congress members to have different priorities. It's the same thing with reporters, right? As we can see all these different biases coming out in the media, and it's left to us to navigate them and to interpret media, knowing that it is not just an unbiased representation of facts, but it's going to have its own slant and its own lens on and its own take on different things.